My dear friends in our Lord, glory to Jesus Christ. We've been hearing a lot in the Gospel about responsibility in the past few weeks. Responsibility is understood in several ways. That is, responsibility both as something that we should do, that is, responsibility as a duty, but also responsibility in the plain sense, as the ability to make answer, the ability to respond, that is, responsibility. In the Scriptures, our Lord gives us an image of this responsibility, the ability to make answer, when he says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in to him and dine with him, and he with me." Take for just a moment this image of standing at the door and knocking. This action of knocking at the door, it creates within the person who is within the house, hearing this, it creates precisely what we've been hearing about lately, that is, that it brings about a state of responsibility. See, the person in the house, hearing a knock on the door, is placed in a state of being able to respond. Being able to go over, to open the door, to encounter the person on the other side of the door, and to let that person into the house. Now, of course, just hearing the knock does not take away the free will of the person who hears it, even if it does bring responsibility to that person, the ability to respond. They're not compelled thereby to respond. They're not forced to respond. They don't have to open the door. They could just creep over to the door quietly, look through the peephole to see who is on the other side, and then not respond, not open the door. You can do that. But at the same time, the person on the other side of the door could then continue to knock more urgently. See, sometimes the quality of a knock on the door can determine whether the person who hears it wants to open that door. Say, for example, you hear a vicious pounding on the door. You're much less likely to want to open that door. But if you hear a knock with an urgency, a persistence, even if you weren't all too inclined initially to stop what you were doing and to go over and open the door, that urgency and that persistence lead you to responding. Persistence. And that persistence, precisely that persistence, is what we hear about in the Gospel today. The persistence of a Canaanite woman who was following after our Lord as he and his disciples passed through the coasts of Tyre and Sidon. She, this Canaanite woman, she was the one who was knocking, and with persistence. For our Lord is not the only one who knocks. Our Lord tells us to do the same thing. Our Lord tells us in the Gospel, "Ask, and it shall be given to you. Seek, and you shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened to you." So we hear of this Canaanite woman in the Gospel, following after our Lord, crying out to him, saying, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, thou Son of David. My daughter is grievously troubled by the devil." But the Gospel says that our Lord answered her not a word. And even further, the Gospel tells us that the Lord's disciples asked him to send the woman away. She was annoying them, constantly crying out after them. And our Lord said, "I was not sent but to the sheep that are lost of the house of Israel." And the woman, a Canaanite and not of the house of Israel, she was nevertheless undaunted. It didn't stop her. She persisted, and she runs up to the Lord himself. She adores him, as the Gospel tells us, and says to him simply, "Lord, help me." Keep those words in mind. If you are ever at a loss for words to pray, keep those words in mind. Lord, help me. For these are the words with which we can knock on the door of the heart of God himself, just as the Canaanite woman does. Lord, help me. And we hear then that the Lord responds. But his response, at first, doesn't seem all that encouraging. He says to the Canaanite woman, "It is not good to take the bread of the children and cast it to the dogs." It seems harsh to hear this, it's true. So this woman is asking our Lord for help, and he essentially here refers to her people as dogs. But our Lord says this so that we might ultimately have, firstly, testimony of the ministry of his earthly life, that is, to the house of Israel. But even more, he says this that we might have testimony of the persistence and the faith of the Canaanite woman. And even more than this is a testimony to the humility of the Canaanite woman. This woman who, even if not of the house of Israel, here persistently knocks on the door of the heart of the Son of David, asking for his mercy. And mercy is given to the humble, not to the proud. And we see that the Canaanite woman responds here in genuine humility and in genuine persistence, accepting the words of the Lord himself, applying them to herself, as she replies, "Yea, Lord, for the whelps also eat of the crumbs that fall from the table of their masters." She's saying here, in effect, even if I am a dog, you are my master. And even the dogs might find satisfaction in the crumbs that fall from their master's tables. How many of us would be so quick to accept such an abasement, such a humbling? Here the Canaanite woman does so without missing a beat. For such was her persistence, such was her love for her daughter, and such was her faith that the Lord could heal her. And the Lord said, "O woman, great is thy faith. Be it done to thee as thou wilt." And her daughter was cured from that hour. Here, finally, we see the fruit of persistence, and the necessity of faith, and the duty to put our love and our care into action, just as the Canaanite woman put her love and her care for her daughter into action, even at the risk of being considered annoying, as she was considered annoying by the disciples, even at the risk of being humiliated, as she might have been, being compared to dogs. But she was not humiliated, for she already was a humble woman. Her first entreaties to the Lord show us that. Remember what she said first? "Have mercy on me, O Lord." And "Lord, help me." Humility and persistence. Humility and persistence. Let these be our watchwords as we go forward, and as we face the trials and responsibilities that we might have this coming week. Let us face our own challenges, ever calling out to the Lord with humility and with persistence, saying with the Canaanite woman, "Have mercy on me, O Lord. Lord, help me."